Today, we become legends.
So the reception to the first episode of this potential series covering Bake Kujira did really well, and you guys seem to like the format, so today we're tackling a god that is arguably hated a lot more than the whale, but is also loved a lot more at the same time. Let's jump right in. Aphrodite and a few other gods in Smite fall into this category of being extremely hated by a large part of the community, but also extremely loved by a smaller, very dedicated part of the community, which makes them difficult to tackle for high res. If a god is just outright hated by almost everyone, it's easier to justify some kind of change to their design or even a full rework, such as the Loki rework. But when said god also has some of the most dedicated mains out there, it's harder to do so because of how pissed off people will become. Aphro is one of those gods where she has an absolutely massive presence as a one trick. The following numbers are completely made up, but I meant to illustrate what I mean. Let's say your average Smite god has 10% of their total matches played by people with at least 1 star on that god. The other 90% are people who just play them a little bit. Aphro is more like 50% of her matches are played by people with at least 1 star on her. Despite being one of the most hated gods in the game, she's also one of the most loved designs by people who do play her. And don't get it twisted, it's not a small amount of people who love Aphro's design. She's currently ranked number 21 out of 130 in pick rate for casual conquest in Smite 1. However, I think this only hardens people's hatred towards the god, and that's not the only thing Aphrodite hardens. Gigantic fucking honkers. Okay, no more of that, I promise. But to be frank, being more popular almost always leads to a god being more hated, as you see them more often. It's harder to hate on a god that you only see once every 50 matches. It's much easier when there's an Aphro in every other match. This obviously is far from the only reason to hate a god, and we'll get into those later. Plenty of not very popular gods are hated by the community, such as Freya, Hebo, and Vamana, who are all bottom 15 in popularity currently, but still widely hated. However, another issue there is that because of the fundamental design of those gods is so reviled, it means that if they ever become powerful enough to be near the top of the meta and seen in every game, it drives the hatred meter through the roof. This isn't a video on Vamana, but just as an example, we saw this in full swing throughout year 10 when Vamana was one of the top solo laners and a pretty good jungler for a large part of the season. And that's when Vamana hatred peaked in the community, and also when I released my original rant video on him. The same thing has happened with Hebo and Freya many times in the past as well. A god that is seen every other match is simply much more likely to draw ire from the community than a god that is seen once every 50 matches. Circling back to Aphro though, she is almost always very high up the popularity charts. As mentioned, she's currently number 21 out of 130 in casual conquest. She's also number 15 in arena, number 20 in joust, and number 12 in slash. Again, I won't really dive into rank stats here because they aren't amazing for representing how popular a god is. They are more of a representation of how strong they are currently. I also won't be presenting any Smite 2 data for that reason. The only pick data I have readily available access to right now is for ranked, and at least currently, Aphrodite is a very common ban in Smite 2 ranked, and thus her actual pick rate is much lower than you'd expect. But of course, popularity alone isn't going to make a god hated. It more so just exasperates any issues that are already there with the design of said god. Ra, Ymir, and Anubis are all top 5 play rate in Smite 1 currently, and I wouldn't say any of those gods are particularly hated by the community. You could maybe make an argument for Anubis being hated a bit, but he's not on the level of something like Aphro, Freya, Nox, Arachne, and many others. So if it's not just popularity, why does everyone hate Aphrodite so much? Well, it comes down to the absolute core of her design, the soulmate mechanic. We'll get into more specific parts of her kit that annoy people later on, but I think those parts could exist in isolation and be only mildly hated. The core reason why so many people hate this god is that she is designed in a way that promotes playing 2v5 instead of a full team effort. If you've been living under a rock or are new to Smite, Aphrodite's main mechanic is linking to a soulmate and essentially turning them into a raid boss while not doing much else useful to help the rest of the team. Let's run down the list real quick. Aphrodite's soulmate gets 11% of her protections, which with a tanky support build is usually between 20 and 30 of both procs late game. If we say it's 25 as an average estimate, squishy gods in Smite 2 have around 70 physical protection and 55 magical protection at level 20. This reduces the raw damage they take by 41% and 35% respectively. Adding 25 extra on top of that brings you to 95 physical and 80 magical procs, bringing their mitigation up to 49% and 45% respectively. So yeah, just by having an Aphro linked to you, you're already taking around 8 to 10% less damage from everything with absolutely no skill required from Aphrodite or her soulmate. People like to rip on how unbalanced Smite is, and they're not entirely wrong, but I feel like some people do exaggerate and miss the fact that Smite is actually balanced on a pretty thin razor's edge a lot of the time, and even buffs or nerfs that appear small can change things dramatically. Even one of the worst backline carries in the game would become instantly top tier if they randomly got a buff to take 10% 10% less damage from all sources. The recent Baron bug is a pretty good example of that actually. And that is literally what having a pocket Afro does for her raid boss. Not to mention some of the actual best backline carries in the game that are already overpowered. Give them a 10% damage reduction and it's basically cooked. But that's obviously not all Afro does for her soulmate. Another massively underrated part of her power is the jealousy buff. With a linked soulmate, anytime Aphrodite changes soulmate, kisses an enemy god, or casts her ultimate, her soulmate gains the jealousy buff for 5 seconds, causing them to deal 10% increased damage. Sound familiar? Yeah, so not only is her raid boss taking 10% less damage at all times, they're also frequently doing 10% more damage. It's extremely hard to fight into anyone with a 20% damage disparity, and like I said before, even some of the worst backline carries in the game will become instantly strong if they just straight up dealt 10% more damage. Add up both of these factors and put them on a god who's actually top of the meta, and you already have a raid boss of epic proportions, but we're not even done yet. In fact, we're not even done with Aphrodite's first ability, as this also grants 50% of Aphrodite's mana regen and 8% of movement speed to her soulmate. The mana regen is whatever for the most part and only really matters in the super early game, but movement speed is a stat that over the course of Smite's life has become more and more restricted, to the point that Smite 2 actually removed it as a stat from items. It still exists on item passives or actives, but you straight up cannot buy an item with permanent movement speed as a stat anymore because of how overpowered it was. Obviously, it lets you chase down or run away from enemies much more effectively, but it also lets you play the map more efficiently, farm more effectively, even juke abilities more effectively. Movement speed is arguably the single most broken stat in the entire game, with penetration being the only one that comes close, and Aphrodite just gives 8% movement speed to her raid boss for free. But let's move on from literally her first ability after what feels like an entire novel and talk about her third ability for a bit. She can heal her soulmate. Yeah, honestly, this healing from this ability was already within reasonable levels before they completely gutted it with the anti-heal update. The healing put out by this ability is really just sustain and not something that is going to make a huge difference in combat when your soulmate is being dived. Sure, an extra 150 health or so might make the difference occasionally, but the healing from this ability is honestly not the issue here. The CDR is the issue. This ability reduces all active cooldowns for Afro and her soulmate by 0.2 seconds per tick for 6 ticks. So a total of 1.2 seconds off of their cooldowns every time this ability is cast. Again, this might seem like a small amount, but over time it really adds up, and considering this ability can easily get down to around a 10-second cooldown and it reduces its own cooldown, this is going to be up around every 9 seconds. 1.2 seconds off your cooldowns every 9 seconds is better than a Chronos Pendant passive, and this is given to both her and her soulmate for basically free. I won't turn this into a rant about how broken flat cooldown reductions are in Smite 2, maybe that could be its own video, but a lot of the reason Smite 2 cooldown rate feels so broken despite being objectively weaker than Smite 1 cooldown reduction is because of flat reduction effects like this. Chronos Pendant, Pendulum Blade, Spear of Desolation, and others. When this reaches a critical mass, things like this can get very silly very quickly, and Afro 3 just contributes to that even more. It's already insane when your mid has Pendant and Deso procs resetting all their cooldowns. It's even more ridiculous when they have a linked Afro on top of that stacking 1.2 seconds off their cooldowns. It might seem like a small number, but it's really not small in its impact on the game. But finally, let's talk about the ability that probably came to your mind first when you read the title of this video, Undying Love. This ult, man. Everything I've talked about so far are passive bonuses that add up to make Afro's soulmate into an absolute raid boss, but what really tips this over the edge is Undying Love. This ability is basically beads and Aegis for 2 people that lasts longer and is on a base 90-second cooldown. That already is insane, but you can also heal during the immunity, which is not the case for literally every other damage immunity effect in the entire game, and Aphrodite can leap to her soulmate after casting, just in case she wasn't basically inside them in the first place or was out of position. Oh, and of course, I said base 90-second cooldown for a reason. Unlike relics, you can reduce this ability's cooldown, and it means that in reality, it's more like a 40 to 50-second cooldown when you build a good amount of cooldown rate and factor in constant reductions from stuff like Lovebirds, maybe even Chronos Pendant. With relics, you can at least know that they are down for a good amount of time if you manage to burn them from the enemy. Aegis is down for 140 seconds and beads are down for 150. Afro ult is frequently up 3 times for every beads or Aegis that would be up. And Smite 2's relic system makes this disparity even more insane, as you can't even build beads and Aegis at the same time anymore. You have to choose just one. Now, obviously, this is a god's ultimate ability, and it should be stronger than a relic that everyone gets access to for free. But should it be this much stronger? I and many others would say no. This isn't really a video about how to fix Aphrodite per se, but I just have to mention that it's crazy that an ultimate this powerful and game warping is on a base 90-second cooldown. This should be at bare minimum 100 seconds, probably something more like 120. So yeah, the combination of taking 10% less damage, dealing 10% more damage, damage, having all of your cooldowns refreshed, and having a note button to stop any attempt on your life makes Aphrodite's soulmate into an absolute raid boss, and that is the core reason why people hate this god so much. We play Smite because we enjoy the strategic team play elements of the game. We live for those huge 5v5 hectic team fights and macro plays. Aphrodite breaks down that core reason why the game is fun, and turns it into can we kill the raid boss or not, which is just extremely unfun to play against, and honestly not very fun to play with either if you're not the raid boss. I haven't touched on that yet, but not only is Aphrodite a bad design in terms of fighting against her, she's also a bad design in the way that she is somewhat designed to neglect the 3 of her other teammates in favor of juicing up one of them. Obviously, you don't have to play Aphrodite in this way, and you can share the love with all of your allies, but I think we've all been in a situation too many times where Aphro is just on your team pocketing one guy, probably her duo queue, and providing nothing of use to her other 3 teammates, which in itself is very frustrating. Basically, she makes the game fun for 2 people and miserable for 8 people, and that is peak bad design in my opinion, and is the main reason people hate this god so much. I don't plan to make this a thing going forward, but I do want to quickly draw a comparison to another MOBA here, as Yuumi from League of Legends suffers from many of the same faults as Aphrodite, and is arguably even more hated within the League community than Aphro is within Smite. Yuumi has a mechanic where she can attach herself to an ally, and her kit is designed around providing buffs, heals, and shields to make that ally immortal. Sound familiar? Yeah, these 2 characters are basically identical except in one key area. Yuumi is completely untargetable while attached to an ally, so you can't even try and focus down the Yuumi, you have to kill the ally she is attached to so that she pops out and then you can kill her. However, Aphro has a similar concept, I think, and that is due to her ultimate and her building tanky from the support role. As far as I'm aware, and correct me if I'm wrong as I don't play that much League, enchanter supports in that game are extremely squishy and evaporate if the enemy team can land an engage on them. Aphrodite in Smite though, she builds full tank from support and has an ultimate that makes her invulnerable for 2 seconds and can reposition her. While it's not quite the same thing as Yuumi being completely untargetable while attached, I do think they serve similar purposes, in the way that trying to kill the Aphro is often a bad idea and you're better off just forcing her ultimate cooldown and trying to kill her linked ally first, then cleaning her up afterwards, which is precisely how Yuumi works in League. So yeah, this kind of character design is not an issue unique to Smite, and it exists in other MOBAs as well, where it is equally annoying and hard to balance. Yuumi is frequently cited as the most hated champion in League, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that many Smite players would say Aphrodite is their most hated god as well. But what are your thoughts? Are you an Aphrodite hater or do you love her design? Let me know down below, and also drop any requests for future Why Everyone Hates videos, and I'll catch you guys for another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds. Honkers.